Hey everyone, welcome to another session around pay equity this time. So we have Nick with us who will be speaking to us around what pay equity is, why is it important, and given that he comes with a huge experience in the field of rewards, he'll be sharing his experiences on how he has seen pay equity being handled before and what are some of the more mature practices on tackling pay equity, right? First things first, Nick, if you can just introduce yourself, what you've done in the past, and what exactly have been your experiences, and in case people want to reach out to you, what will be the best way to reach out?
Yeah, sure. I started back in HR in 2004. So it's been a long journey. Seen a lot of things change.
Right.
I've been in everything from higher education, worked in pharmaceuticals, did some contract work off to the side, and then I'm working for a restaurant management company now that's based in Atlanta, Georgia. So
Got it. Wonderful,
uh,
wonderful, Nick. So I think the first thing that everyone would love to understand is, and because there's not a lot of conversation that is happening around pay equity here in India, can you first explain what does it actually mean? What does it mean? Of course, one is what the term means, but then what it means for organizations, as in when they hear pay equity being managed or not exactly being managed, what does it mean for an organization?
yeah, that's a good question. I think whether it's driven from COVID or not, the economy has changed so much with what we have available to us as organizations. Whether that's global economy before, sure, but now it's to the point where you can work with people all over the planet and at all hours of the day. So your recruitment pool has gotten so much bigger from your talent. So I think what that's presenting to organizations now is one, it's a data driven market, right? We got to operate on what is current. Our formal um, philosophy may have been, we participate in salary surveys. 6 months later, that data is good. Sometimes that's at this point when things are moving so fast, we've got to find a way to move faster. When it comes along to pay equity, it's the way that the work has evolved. I think people want to be fairly compensated for their jobs. They want to be fairly compensated for work they're doing. And when you look at any sort of factors, whether that's race, religion, sex, anything like that, it's looking at similar types of it's the similar work and expecting similar rewards for that work. So I think when you look at how that industry is changing and what we have available to us in terms of that data and just being able to break down and cut data from so many different aspects and so many different criteria, what that gives us is that ability to dissect that and make more data driven decisions, I think. So,
Got it. Got it. So what I understand from this is that pay equity essentially for an organization would mean that given the same work or the same quality of work, there should be equal pay for two individuals, right? Or maybe there shouldn't be any differentiation on the basis of say religion, sect, gender, something like that. Of course, basis geography, there still can be a differentiation because uh, compensation benchmark is extremely geographically centric. What compensation would be as a benchmark in one geography may not be in another. So geography, they can still be differentiated, but at least on the other factors there shouldn't be any bias when it comes to pay, right?
I think the one aspect to consider would be that equal doesn't always mean the exact same. So
Right.
there's equity and there's equal. So plus or minus 10% of what a market is, because you still want to reward your people for experience, for longevity in their roles. Those are
Right.
still important factors to consider with compensation, but it's being you're not paying your female workers substantially less. You're not paying your this group of workers substantially more than anyone else. It's based on qualitative and quantitative criteria.
Got it. Got it. And when it comes to reporting, Nick, does it mean that, let's say, uh, when I see compensation differences between two, I would say sample sizes. One, let's talk about say males versus females and others, right? Maybe there shouldn't be any paid. There of course will be a pay difference, right? But when you say there shouldn't be a substantial pay difference, is there a percentage that is taken as the golden standard that okay, more than this is what we can call as a bias, and up to this amount is acceptable? What is that acceptable limit of a difference?
I would look at probably plus or minus 10% from what your median is. Your data is going to vary based on some criteria because you look at
Correct.
cost of living, for example. You look at prior experience, things like that. But and it's not going to operate one way. Like a male's not always going to make more than a female, and a female's not always going to make more than a male. But that female may have just as better or just as good, if not better, history, work history, and performance, and things like that. I mean, those factors are still, our historical factor was always looked at from the compensation world is still important. It's just, it's like you used a good word. Be aware of that bias and work with your
Right.
numbers to understand how the market's adjusting.
Got it. Got it. And Nick, you've worked with multiple organizations before, right? Of varying sizes, of varying maturity levels. Also, pay equity as a philosophy also has evolved a lot since the time you would have started working at organizations. So, help us understand what does uh, what does this mean for an organization? So there could be organizations which, for one, do not even care about what pay equity is, right? For whatever
Yep.
reason, right? The second type could be they care about pay equity, but are currently not doing anything for whatever reason to sort of manage that. And then there would be organizations who both care and actually do something about managing pay equity. So
Yep.
help me understand. Are there equal percentages of such organizations, or do you think there are more? There's a large percentage of the audience or companies who are actually doing something, or who are not doing something but care, or don't even care and don't even do something about it. So can you help us identify, based on your experience, your peers, how large of I would say an agenda this is, or importance this is right now in the US?
Yep. Uh, that's a great question. So I think with the way that the job market is looking over things, you're always going to have situations where the comp philosophy of that organization is going to matter. So I think historically we always say we want to pay the median, right? But with the way things have been moving and how quickly things have been moving, the median is almost like a moving target right now. So
Absolutely.
that comp philosophy has to still drive what that organization's doing. I've had family and friends work in different industries as well. So you look at things like, social services, for example, that's, nonprofit type situations that they're probably going to pay less because one, they don't have the
Correct.
resources compared to, your Fortune 500 companies that likely have more resources. So
Correct.
you, pay equity is going to be important, but reasonableness and the ability to pay that budget is still going to be a factor. So I think when you look at within those groups, what are those organizations focusing on in terms of their talent? So are they looking for the younger professionals? Are they startup companies looking for younger professionals to get things moving, things like that? Or are they established companies to where they're looking for seasoned veterans and they're looking for people with 10 years of experience? So there's different factors there because if I'm an experienced professional and I'm applying to a startup company, maybe my salary expectation is going to be out of range for them. So it's just
Correct.
varies from company to company and how that looks. Um, but that comp philosophy is so important up front because that drives everything about how comp decisions are made, from the recruiting strategy up through different bonuses. Are there incentive pays involved, things like that? So there's just a host of different factors when it comes into pay equity, and people are seeing that now because, I mean, obviously the internet's been around a while, but with the introduction of AI and things like that, how that's evolved in the market, and it's just the availability that people can go and find good data. Like it's different than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So,
Correct. Correct. And talking about whether you have that in the comp philosophy or not, I'm sure penalizing people for tenure and continue to paying them lesser is not something which is in anybody's comp philosophy, right? You would never have that. In fact, the contrary
Yeah.
might be true that okay, I as an organization will not penalize my people for tenure, but that comes at a cost because given that the markets might be, at least for some functions, might be moving very very fast, right? Which means in order to catch up to market, in order to still be able to hire, you might have to make those hires at a reasonably higher compensations, which
Yep.
means you're widening that gap with respect to existing employees, and hence pay equity goes for a toss. Now, one is you're on the constant hustle with your leadership, with the board around the budget that is available for increments every time. And then penalizing people for tenure is not something that you want to have, as a strategy. You do not want to have that. How
Yep.
do you manage between both of these cases? Because then there are people in your organization who are seasoned, who have stayed for so long years in your organization, but are still at lesser comp, and many of those also could be high performers. So you have high
Yep.
performers, tenured people in the organization sitting at lower comps, and then fresh hires being made at 20% higher, 30% higher of their existing comp, and then they're sitting at a comp of 120%. How does an organization, how does the leader in the rewards team actually tackle that scenario? And because it takes a lot in terms of budget, it will take a lot to bring everyone uh, to the market, or not forget market. It takes, how do you manage pay equity in such a scenario, also
Yep.
with every employee not just coming in, of course, every employee coming in, pay equity might go for a toss, but with every employee exiting the organization, pay equity again can go for a toss, right? For example, you have all your let's take gender for example again. Let's say an employee of a particular gender leaves, and that is a person who was sort of bumping up the median, and now with that person leaving, all of a sudden your median for that gender drops, right? So
Yep.
are
Yep.
companies actively doing something to monitor this, or currently that is not the case?
Good question. It's like I said, it's kind of a moving target right now. I think that those are the important factors that you're talking pay compression, right? So, um, especially coming, working in higher ed, work for two large research institutions, it's staggering sometimes some of the expectations that our young college grads have today. Not to
Correct.
say that they're not worth it, but it's like you said, working within the budget of that
Correct.
organization, because that budget has limited resources, right? So when you look at kind of your tenured employees, sometimes it's not always going to be that base compensation, right? You look at total compensation, you look at other opportunities that are available, whether that's career development or cross training, things like that, that can entice those long term tenured employees to stay and to provide that insight. Whether you give them some project based work or things like that, other benefits. PTO. You see lots of things about unlimited PTO and things like that. How that's utilized. The ability to mentor people. That's some. If that's in your forte, then people enjoy those kind of things. So maybe it's not always that base compensation you look at. You've got to be creative with how people are being attracted to their job. They've got to enjoy the work. They've got to enjoy the environment. It's that
Correct.
situation where it's not just the 8 to 5 job anymore. You've got to provide that opportunity to where you're they have ability to grow and ability to do other things that interest them. So
God, no, no, absolutely right. Very rightly said, Nick. You know, cash compensation is not just the only element of total rewards, and there have to be, I would say, more innovative methods in which you are able to attract that talent without actually having to punch a big hole on the pocket, or without having destroy the pay equity internally. Absolutely, that
yep,
is required. But and this is especially in fast-growing organizations where all of a sudden, there's a requirement to grow, let's say, a team size from 60 engineers to 200 engineers in just 1 year's time frame, or just 5 months time frame, right? That time, how do you avoid making those rock star hires at much higher comp, right? When you are being pushed by the growth teams to make hires to grow the team, and for all the right reasons, right? uh, is it so that growth stage organizations actually should not be paying that much of an attention to pay equity when they're growing, or when they fall under this bucket of the growth stage when it comes to employees? Do you think pay equity is something that ideally should be handled by, or ideally is something that should be looked upon once a company matures, and not when a company is in the growing phase? What's your take on that? Because for starters, there are thousands of things to worry about. They have to worry about not shutting down the next month, right? uh,
Yep. Yep.
is it expected out of them to also manage pay equity while they're growing, or that is not something that one really expects?
I think that where people are at in their careers it's going to play into that factor as well. So, do you have someone that's interested in doing a growth organization? Maybe that's their interest. The upside of something like that is enormous. I mean, you have your downside, of course, just like every other situation. But when you have a growth organization that's growing at the rates that we're seeing some of these companies do, like you mentioned, 16 to 200, it's not even unusual to see that stuff anymore. So
Correct.
I think depending, you've got to target the right people as well. So if you're a growing organization and you're looking to pay at the 25th percentile versus the 50 percentiles, some of the organizations paying the 75th percentile, then you've got to know that up front. You've got to establish that. You've got to make those expectations known. So no one's going to be surprised.
Right.
The growth organizations have different um, options to them, I guess, as far as being nimble with what they can offer, whether that's, you look at stock options or something like that, of what that company can provide, sign-on bonuses, other incentives that may not always be that base pay. The equity part of itself is still going to be critical, because if you're going to bring in 100 people, and whether we like it or not, those 100 people are going to talk as far as what they're making. So um, they're if somebody finds out that they're making 20% less than the person working next to them, whether it's performance or not, whether it's experience or not, it's still the fact of the matter. That person's going to become disengaged with how they look at things. The cost of, we've all seen what the cost of turnover can do to organization. So it's still that fine line, right, of operating between what we can pay, what our recruitment philosophy is, what our total comp philosophy is, and you've got to you've got to find a way to set yourself apart, I think, from the next person over. So
Very true. No, that's right. And you mentioned that the employees might come to know that, okay, the other person, or they're making 20% lesser than what their peers are making. What happens in that case? As in, of course, there's a down morale, but there could be other serious implications to not managing pay equity. Can you talk something around the laws governing pay equity, the compliances that the companies have to adhere to? Because the compliances are yet to come here in India. There are not many laws that talk about how to manage pay equity, any sort of
yeah,
reporting that is done here in India. But let's understand from you, in more mature markets, what are the laws governing pay equity, and is that something that companies actively monitor, report, or is there a particular exercise that they engage in every quarterly or biannually to sort of see if they're equitable? Else, that could also have some legal implications. So, can you talk a little bit on more compliance and legalities related to pay equity?
yeah. Uh, the compliance part is critical, because
Okay.
it's the information's available. The public has that information. The employees are going to have that information. Sometimes those decisions are made, they're not made with any sort of hidden agendas or with negative connotations.
Correct.
It's sometimes it's just not having all the full information. And those are the if we can address those situations, great, let's address it, because that's again, they may have been made unintentionally just because of lack of knowledge.
Correct.
As far as the legal part of it, basically the answer is you've got to be ready, because people are gonna talk, whether that comes up on Facebook, LinkedIn, any kind of Instagram, things like that. Those things are going to be available, and if the media gets a hold of those type of things, you're going to have people knocking on your door. You're going to have people calling you and saying, "Hey, what's the deal? Why are the women making so much less than the men?" Um,
Correct.
Maybe there's data to support it, but likely not. So you've got to have your defenses ready in terms of, this is what our data shows. This is what we're going to have. It may be the one outlier that causes you to look at things, but that one outlier is going to be expensive in the end, because if people see a general rule that this organization is paying their women less than their men, it's going to present issues. It's going to present recruiting issues. It's going to present engagement issues. It's just the overall picture of the organization. It's going to be rough to work with. So, um, specific laws. I mean, we're seeing it at all levels of how you would distinguish people, whether that's, again, race, religion, sex, gender orientation, just all kinds of things, because those are the things that people separate themselves. They tie to a specific of how they identify themselves, and they want to understand, they want to see, they want to know that, hey, I'm just because I'm identifying as this group, I should be paid the same, doing the same work as someone identifying as that group. So,
Got it. Got it. That means, okay, one is, of course, people coming to know that they're paid lesser, and then they're shouting about it online or other ways, right? Is there, or I'm sure there would have been cases where someone has taken this legally, that, okay, I know that, you know, I am being treated unfairly because of my race, maybe, right? Can they take a legal action against an organization? And is that something that you've come across before, as in around you, that has happened? And the person actually winning the argument, and the company not just suffers a bad name, but also suffers monetary loss because of that. Is that something that you've seen happening?
you definitely see it. You Again, it's that perception's not always reality, but that perception paints a picture for that company. So,
Right.
maybe the information is not fully correct. Maybe they don't have the full picture. Maybe they're not comparing apples to apples type situations. But it's in today's world, when you get the negative bias or the negative views, whether that's coming from internal or external, they're tough to adjust. They're tough to come back from, because you lose trust of your employees, you lose trust of your recruits, you lose trust of your customers. Those are all tough things to come back from. Again, people may say, "Hey, company XYZ is not paying fairly," and maybe that's not the case. Maybe they're disgruntled. Maybe they're not. Again, they don't have the full picture of things.
Correct.
But trying to come back and you've got to be able to present your information from a sound perspective to say, this is what we're showing. This is our practice. We intentionally do not bias, use bias against any certain groups. So, um, it's again that data aspect, that ability to have your information and prove your points, I guess. So,
Got it. And since you mentioned that you have to have your defenses ready, is this something which is a common practice there in the US, that they would have certain analytics or dashboards or data always ready with them that supports their argument that they are not biased against a specific section? Is that something that they frequently maintain on a monthly or a quarterly basis, or this is something that they outsource to some agency? I'm just trying to understand, how do
yep,
companies manage pay equity right now and have their defenses ready against any such lawsuits? That is one.
yep,
Secondly, is it how would you classify it? Is it difficult to manage pay equity internally? Is it something which you classify as easy to do, or moderately difficult to do, or actually tough to manage? And that is the reason why many companies don't even pay attention to managing pay equity, because it is so tough to manage. How would
yep.
you classify that on that scale of easy, moderately difficult to very difficult to manage? And then what are the ways in which companies manage it right now? Do they have an internal team dedicated to managing pay equity, or they use a software, or they use an external consulting firm to do that? And how frequent is that management?
Yep. Yeah, great question. Uh, so go back to your previous question. So, like, how we're doing it. I think when I started in comp 20 years ago, everything was Excel based, right? I mean, Excel's a great tool. Don't get me wrong. I am a self-professed Excel nerd. I love it. It
I love it
offers
too.
lots of
Yes.
quick opportunities to
Very
make
true.
things easy. So I think with the way things are changing though, and what we're seeing in terms of the market, a good pay equity tool is it's just mission critical. I don't know how a company would operate from just using Excel in today's world, because there's just so many different factors that you're looking at. The data changes so quickly that I just don't know, even coming from again a very Excel pro professional, I just can't imagine having just Excel as the way I'm looking at it. So, whether that's a database, whether that's an external tool, consulting agencies are have that niche market right now to where they probably have access to things. They offer those resources, but your tools that are available to you in terms of how you can break down your data, whether that's through um, looking at different graphical interfaces, or whether that's looking at uh, different country by country situations. There's those kind of things. It's going to be nearly impossible to track with just your simple spreadsheets anymore. So
Got
um,
it.
the second question in terms of the difficulty, it's subjective in a way, I think, because so here's a situation where I worked for a small nonprofit that had 200 employees just across the state of Indiana. It's much different than working for an organization that has 70,000 employees in 25 different countries, and they're working different shifts and different types of work. It's so does your 200 group employer need the type of system that your bigger groups do? Probably not. I mean, because there's variable factors right there. So but difficulty wise, I think just because of how quickly things are changing, how the market is adjusting from the global economy standpoint, I'm going to say it's at least on the medium to high difficulty. So because again, getting it wrong is so expensive. That's the issue. So
Correct. And since, very rightly said, Nick, that how a small organization of probably a 200 employees would manage pay equity internally would be logistically different from how a 70,000 employer would be managing pay equity, right? Of course. But
yep,
importance wise, it is critically important for both of them, right? Because there's so much to
absolutely,
lose if you do not manage that right. And since that
yep,
is very important, I get to understand that every organization, let's say, let's talk about, let's say, 500 to 1,000, or let's say up to 1,000 employee strength, it becomes very important for them to manage pay equity. And if that is the case, do these companies actively engage in a solution A, or have internal teams dedicated for this, or take external help of consultants? Are they doing either of these three, and which one of these is most prominent? Or I would say, let me frame this differently. What would you propose to an organization, let's say that's about 1,000 employees, and they want to manage their pay equity internally? What would you propose for them to do?
great question. I think that because of the volume of information that's available to you, like you said, it affects a small company different.
Right.
My preference is you've got to have a system that can adjust to things quickly. So like if you've built a career architecture plan and you've got 500 different jobs that you're pricing, and things change from your internal organization, how quickly can your internal team make those kind of changes, whether that's market based, whether that's looking at the impacts of AI, things like that, because
Correct.
your career architecture program may be a piece of how your total rewards function works, but you've also got that same team is going to have regular work, right? So if things change and you need a total new career architecture revival, that
Correct.
team's not going to have likely not going to have the capacity to implement a system again in 3 months, in 6 months, in 12 months, even. So your external consulting agencies will provide that opportunity to kind of take away some of that extra project work. You obviously do lose. I mean, the I guess downfall of that consulting agency is they may not have the internal feel for how the organization functions. That's going to be a challenge you're going to have at all times. So it's trying to find that middle ground of what works for an organization versus what is our budget, what is our capacity to do this. Again, you might have a team of four, but if you've got two people that are off on leave, or you've got one open position that you've been trying to fill for 6 months, it's there's so many factors that play into those type of decisions. It's a matter. I mean, it's going to come down to good leadership. I mean, that leader is going to be able to step back and say, okay, this is what we've got right now. This is what we're able to do. What do I think my team can handle? So,
Got it. And while uh, doing all of this, Nick, from your experience, what are some of the most common obstacles that you come across? Say, I as a leader want to make sure that pay equity is managed well in my organization. What are some of the most common pitfalls or most common hurdles that will come by me, and I'll not be able to sort of manage pay equity? One is, of course, we mentioned, we talked about that initially, is budget, right? We have,
yep,
it might be a very tight rope that we operate on, and there may not be budgets available to manage pay equity fully, right, in one cycle or in just a quarter, right? Apart from
yep.
budget, what is one more or two more very common obstacles that come across leaders trying to manage pay equity internally, and how would you suggest they sort of overcome that?
Oh, that's a good question too. So trying to I think when you it's an education piece almost to a point where if those managers aren't aware of how things, if in a hierarchy organization, if you've got franchises, for example, things like that, your corporate office may have a way that they're doing things. You may have a group of managers in one way that's operating one silo, and you've got a group of managers over here operating a different silo. I think that consistency is one of the biggest struggles you see. So the budget may not always be there, but maybe this group of managers handles it. They have different priorities with how they're doing it. Maybe they want to prioritize their IT groups, or this group wants to prioritize their finance group. So it's getting that consistency with how the organization is going to address those challenges. I think is one thing you always see. Um, Another one is just it's the availability of talent, because the again, the market has changed in terms of how we recruit people.
Correct.
It's not just your send out your Indeed applications anymore. It's you've got to have different ways of working, and different ways to connect with those workers. I think is an ongoing struggle. So,
Very true. That's right. That's right. And in this scenario where hiring is becoming more and more tough, right? People are The data is not that readily available with respect to benchmarks. What is the role of, I would say, how does total rewards come into the picture, and how do you use total rewards to sort of see if you're still able to attract that talent, and how have companies evolved from using total rewards to, let's say, 20 years back to how they use it now, and is it still a large distance to go? Because I have rarely come across companies who actually present total rewards to their new hires. I've rarely
yep,
come across companies who actually are able to present total rewards to all of their employees, right? And in
yep,
absence of doing so, when you're not even able to, as an organization, not even able to present total rewards to your employees, how can you even expect them to understand total rewards? Forget using total rewards to your advantage and still using that to retain your top performers or high potential employees. As in, can you share some of the good practices, not so good practices, or best ways to leverage total rewards? How have the companies done in the past? Have they created some sort of presentations for all employees, or have they used tools to do that, or some internal tool that they've created to present total rewards? What are some of the very common or good practices that companies in the West have resorted to?
Yep. So I think that's going to start high level with your HCM system. You know, what system are you using to pay your employees? There's so many different options out there right now. They all have goods, positive sides of it, and they all have drawbacks. I mean, if there was one good system, everybody would use it, right? So
Correct.
um, I think that there's different tools available, whether that's total reward statements, looking at total comp factors. You know, how can we compare things from, you know, this is what we're offering as company A, our competitors are offering B, another competitor's offering C. You know, but it's also again where you're at in your business cycle. You know, where your employees at in their employee life cycle. Um,
Correct.
you, I mean, when I started my career 20 years ago, the first thing that I wanted to know was base pay because I was a young college kid, right? I mean, I had to have enough to pay the bills. But the way things have changed, especially with, you know, with the pandemic and how it affected the entire world, it's fascinating to see how the total rewards world will evolve, continue to evolve over the next year, over the next 5 years. You know, whether that's some of the creative things that are going to come out of some of these case studies and things like that are going on. You know, what PTO is one thing. I mean, health insurance. I mean, those things are, but they've been around forever. You know, I mean, people expect that usually as part of their roles. But some of the things that you see today in terms of, you know, the career development, you know, we can offer you the opportunity to train other professionals. We can, whether that's continue your education, you know, finding something that interests you, and we can help subsidize that, whether it's subsidizing student loans. You know, a lot of your younger professionals have those student loans that they're paying off. Um, you know, I guess I'm not. I will say I'm a very numbers based person, so those creative things are not my forte. But it will be interesting to see how that continues to evolve because the companies that aren't taking the advantage of the total rewards, they're gonna get left behind. That's the unfortunate piece of it. So um, the total comp statements help, but you've got to find a way, whether that's through, you know, retirement contributions, whether that's through some sort of other tools that are available. So how can I show your base pay plus your, you know, your ancillary benefits plus your extra perks, you know, discount programs, things like that? What can we use to show the value of this offer to you? The value of your employment is not just what your paycheck shows.
Correct. And is it fairly common, Nick, to communicate total rewards to the employees in the US, or that's still a long way to go? As in, is it fairly common, or is it not common, and still companies are evolving into that?
Yeah, I think you're definitely seeing it a lot more than what we did even 5 years ago.
Okay.
It's still going to be a struggle with how we again differentiate those different employees, how they separate themselves from the market. But you're definitely seeing it a lot more in terms of what's important to people, and they want to know those extra things that make up that total rewards package.
Got it. So what I meant was, Nick, out of 10 companies, how many companies would actually be communicating total rewards versus companies who would want to, but in absence of a tool or in absence of the bandwidth to do so, are not communicating total rewards as of now? What is the percentage on the both the sides?
Yeah, I would probably take an educated guess that we're probably looking at about 6 out of 10 that are probably showing that total rewards philosophy and how it could help that basic employment package. So, you know, I can think again when I started my career, it just there wasn't those type of extra things that were available to us. You might have found out about it, you know, after the fact, but it wasn't something that I said, hey, I'm going to take this job over this job because they offer XYZ. So, um,
Correct.
you know, at that point, I would have said 1 out of 10, maybe 2 out of 10. So I think we're seeing progressive growth in the industry. There's still a long way to go. There's still, I think that, um, different HCM platforms have capabilities to do these different functions. I think if there's an HCM system that separates themselves in terms of being able to be the market bearing standard of, hey, we offer the best total comp statements. I mean, to me, I think that would be a golden goose waiting to happen. So
So have you figured out a golden goose yet? Have you come across the
I
golden goose yet?
wish, I wish, because if I could do that, I wouldn't have to worry so much about how I was going to pay my bills. So.
Got it, got it. No, interesting, interesting, Nick. We are towards the end of our session. We are almost time there. Nick, any I would say advice that you would give out to the leaders who are still in less mature market, are still uh, struggling to sort of use total rewards to their advantage? One, uh, also in countries where pay equity is not that big an issue compliance wise, but still because it is the right thing to do, is there any reading material that you would love to share with the audience as to, as a good resource where they can learn from?
I've got a lot of information from, like, World at Work has always been a good source for me. You look at things. There's great number of podcasts. And I would say one piece of advice that I've learned maybe in the past few years has been, just because a podcast doesn't give you the information that you want to hear doesn't mean that it could still be helpful, because it may give you examples of how you don't want to do things. And that's not a bad thing. It's you've every company is going to have different tools on how they're looking at things, different um, objectives with what they're trying to accomplish. I think so. I think those are, just be create be what's the word, be creative. I think be curious with what's
Correct.
available to you, because there's tons and tons of resources out there. You've got to be able to break those down. What's a good resource here versus what's not going to help me. But um, there's things out there. I mean,
Got it.
things like even just Chat GPT has just taken leaps and bounds in terms of, it's staggering what's available to you just with a simple internet search anymore. So
Very true. Very true. Great. Then, thank you so much for the insights, Nick. That's all that we had for today's session. Thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your insights. I'm sure there's a lot more to be done in this domain. It is still very nascent. It is still taking its early stages to be where it will be, and the laws are still evolving. The compliance is still evolving, and the more prepared the organizations are, it will only be in their favor to eventually not having to unturn a mountain later on. So as long as they're taking baby steps towards this, I think it'll still be manageable largely. So yeah, thank you once again, Nick.